Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, Mr. Chair, last year there were a series of media reports of riots, fires, injuries at Bon Air Juvenile Correctional Facility. You may have seen that in the news. Just to clarify, Bon Air is the only correctional center for youth in all of Virginia. So the Commission on Youth, which I am a member of, formed a work group as a result of these reports. And they started to research best practices. And the work group found that extended room confinement at Bon Air was likely a major factor contributing to these behavioral issues. And these findings align with research into the impacts of isolation on youth. Extended isolation in a room has often been shown to slow brain development and cause higher rates of anxiety or depression on our youth. And that was a recommendation by the American Psychological Association. And they did recommend banning solitary confinement for juveniles in 2024. So this bill, House Bill 91, seeks to shed light on the impacts extended room confinement has on our youth and set standards to prevent excessive isolation. In addition to requiring the Department of Juvenile Justice to study room confinement, this bill also directs the DJJ to implement more programming for residents and trauma-informed training for staff. The bill also requires Department of Juvenile Justice to work with community organizations to develop collaborative programs for youth in custody and collect data on program participation to measure outcomes. The bill also requires Department of Juvenile Justice to report on program outcomes and present any recommendations based on collected data to the Commission on Youth and to the chairman of the Senate Committee on Rehabilitation and Social Services and the House Committee on Health and Human Services by November 1st of this year. As I mentioned, this bill was recommended and was also adopted unanimously by the Commission on Youth at its December meeting. Hope it is the will of this subcommittee to recommend reporting the bill. And Mr. Chair, I also have members of the Commission on Youth here today who would like to speak to the bill as well.
Thank you, Delegate Siebold. Are there questions from the committee? Those wishing to speak in favor of the bill in person, please come forward.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Mackenzie Babachenko. I serve on the Commission on Youth. I'm here in my independent capacity as Commonwealth Attorney, Hannibal County. I did have the ability and the opportunity to be a part of this work group, and what we were charged with doing, it was myself, Julie McConnell, who advocates for our youth, and Senator Favola. We had our task was really to find areas in the entire juvenile justice system that were ripe for improvement, and this was one of those areas that we identified where there was frustration amongst all of the stakeholders, including DJJ. And I think everyone agrees that confining our youth in a solitary way, that there's nothing really good that comes from that, but there can be staffing issues, there can be public safety issues that also need to be considered. So that being said, this bill doesn't direct how many hours specifically, but to study what our goals should be. Make sure we're using trauma-informed practices and considering all of that so that everybody, all these stakeholders can have the same conversation at the same time. I think this bill is only good and will help us better serve our youth community. Thank you. I support the bill.
Thank you.
Fatima Muwahid with Survivors for Justice Reform. Again, I reiterate the fact that the brain goes into atrophy, and these are developmental brains. So this is not something that has easily corrected. This is a great bill. Thank you, Delegate, for that.
Thank you so much.
David Smith, Social Action Linking Together. For all the reasons mentioned before, we support this bill.
Thank you. Turning online, Julie McConnell, welcome.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. It was my pleasure to serve on the work group, as you heard, with Mackenzie Babachenko and Senator Favola as part of the Virginia Commission on Youth. And I'm a law professor at the University of Richmond. I run a children's defense clinic there where law students represent kids in court. So we have had a lot of opportunities to interact with children at Bon Air Juvenile Correctional Center. And we've seen, especially over the last few years, that there's been a rise in the use of in-cell confinement for many, many hours at a time. Ostensibly, that is used to deal with the fact that DJJ is understaffed. But obviously, it's not really the right way to handle these kinds of situations. And I think this bill does exactly as Ms. Babichenko said. It asks the department to implement best practices in this regard and to study the effects of this in-room confinement that has been excessively used to make sure that we're doing the best we can to prepare these young people to return to the community. These young people will return to our community. They're not serving life sentences. And so we want to make sure they're prepared to be productive citizens and are fully rehabilitated to the best of our ability. That has not been happening over the last few years, and so that's why this bill is so important, and I urge you to support it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. We have Miss Amy Walters. Good morning.
Hi, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Amy Walters. I'm a legal aid justice center attorney, and I run the youth advocacy clinic at University of Virginia School of Law, kind of the parallel to Julie McConnell's clinic. For the reasons the previous speaker stated, we support this bill. I just do want to highlight that, you know, during the time the conditions at Bon Air were happening, there was outcry by the youth themselves, by their families, by advocates, and still these conditions persisted. And even Bon Air had 2 audits, their internal certification audit, they had an external audit, and still these conditions persisted because the current regulations and laws we have around room confinement are inadequate, which is why this study is needed. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And Ms. Valerie Slater, I know you spoke to it earlier, but just make sure we've got you for the record.
For the record, yes, Valerie Slater, Executive Director of Rise for Youth, and speaking also on behalf of the Virginia State Conference in AACP, and in my capacity as a criminal defense attorney working specifically with youth. We support this bill.
Thank you so much. The bill is back for the committee. Are there questions? Delegate Webert.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Delegate Seibold, can you educate me on what happened at Bon Air?
You know, I wasn't on the work group, and I don't want to give you all the incorrect facts. So can I, if you don't mind, can I call up Mr. Chair, the
Absolutely, welcome.
Executive Director of the Commission on Youth?
Thank you. Sorry.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. So back in the winter of 2025, there was lots of media reports in the Richmond area about fires, riots. There's particularly the big one was the Super Bowl riot that happened at Bon Air, calls being made to Chesterfield, law enforcement to come to intervene. Numerous reports that was in this area. So in April of 2026, my chair, Senator Barbara Favola, called an emergency meeting of the Commission on Youth to learn more about what was going on with Bon Air. We had presentations from the Department of Juvenile Justice. You know, they said, you know, staffing was an issue. Also, there was information that was given about the number of responses that emergency crews had come to Bon Air from Chesterfield County that was given by Delegate Carrie Coyner, as that was in her district. Following that meeting, Senator Favola pulled together a work group to look specifically at ways to approach what was going on. Also, she requested Governor Youngkin to do an independent investigation of what was going on at Bon Air. Governor Youngkin tasked the Office of the Inspector General to do an audit of Bon Air, and they gave that report in December. And some of the things that Delegate Seibold mentioned this morning was part of that report. And they had many recommendations to improve the situation at Bon Air. So I don't know, Mr. Chairman, does that answer your question, Delegate Wiebert?
To an extent, but can I ask one more?
Further question?
So in regards to the, I guess, isolation points of this piece of legislation, was Bon Air utilizing that extensively because they're vastly understaffed?
So that was one of the things that we heard, and also that was in the report from the Inspector General. They were understaffed in a way that they handled understaffing was room confinement. And what kind of happened after that, when you put kids in a room that are 16, 17, 18 years old for hours on end. You know, when they get out of their rooms, they act up. I mean, I would act up, you would act up. And then fires were being set. They were using very creative things that they were doing. Staff couldn't control this, so they had to put, kids in their rooms and confine them to the rooms. And then it just kept building and building and building. The department has taken steps, to try to increase the staffing at Bon Air, like lots of job fairs to try to take care of that. But really, and we really struggled when we were looking at this work group, and Ms. Babachenko we would say solitary confinement. They're like, we really don't use solitary, So it was the language. So we were like, okay, then what we really want to do is to try to encourage we flipped it, encourage time outside of their room. So we kind of flipped it rather than trying to figure out the language to say, we need to have more, not just structured programs for kids in the Department of Juvenile Justice, but just time to socialize and to be with other kids outside their rooms.
Okay, thank you so much for your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The bill is back before the committee.
Move to report.
The motion's been made and properly seconded by Delegate Bennett Parker to report the wonderful House Bill 91 that is before us in discussion.
May I speak to the legislation?
Delegate Weber speaking to the bill.
So just real quick, I would like to point out that we've had a couple of pieces of legislation today that deal with isolation and deal with a number of different things. This bill seems it's going to be much more comprehensive than that, but it also doesn't get to the heart of what we really need to, which is to make sure that we have the appropriate amount of folks to oversee the folks that are serving their time for the various reasons. I'd like to just point out that we need to take a good hard look at that, because it's not only the inmates that are unsafe, it's the folks that work there. And as was pointed out, when you keep kids in age 16 to 17 locked, just away from each other, I mean, I don't know about you, but I caused a lot of problems. Thank goodness Facebook wasn't around, right? And so I just like to point out that I believe this is the solution to this problem would be twofold. One would be to make sure that we have more people that can oversee these youth, along with the additional recommendations that are within your bill. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Like you heard it here first. Delegate Weber wants to raise taxes to increase staffing. We and you are going to work together on this. The motion is made and properly seconded. Members may please cast their vote. And the bill reports unanimously.